There were alarms. They were quiet, polite ones, the kind that didn't so much scream as gently suggest panic might be appropriate. The sterile white walls of the medical bay glowed faintly with lavender pulse lights. A faint scent of antiseptic mist hung in the air, and a tall, green-skinned alien with wide, translucent eyes paced back and forth beside a diagnostic pod. Nurse Frillix adjusted the control panel for the third time, eyes darting nervously between the readout and the unconscious human inside the pod. The human's temperature read 40 degrees Celsius. "Impossible," Frillix muttered, voice high and stretched tight with disbelief. Its 4 fingers fluttered over the console again, running the scan twice more. "Fatal. This level is fatal." The medical bay door hissed open. A second alien, taller and more angular, glided in. Dr. Resch stood with an air of calm authority, the kind cultivated over decades of treating every known species across the Andromeda circuit. Resch peered at the screen. "That's a human," Resch said blandly, as though that explained everything. "I know it's a human," Frillix snapped. "But this temperature 40 degrees. Their blood should be boiling. He's not even sweating," Resch said, tilting his head. "Strange." The human stirred. Frillix jumped back, bumping into a sanitizer station. "It's waking. He's boiling and he's waking," the pod hissed open. The man inside groaned, rubbed his face, and sat up slowly. His hair was plastered to his forehead and his eyes were glassy. He blinked at the 2 aliens staring at him. "Water," he rasped. Frillix leapt back again. "It speaks." Resch handed the man a small container of ionized water which he downed in one long pull. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then looked around. "Where?" he started. "You collapsed during the atmospheric conversion test," Resch said. "You were unconscious for 43 minutes. Frillix leaned forward, eyes wide. "You should be dead." The man squinted. "Don't think I am." "Your internal temperature is dangerously elevated," Frillix said. "We are uncertain how your species survives such thermal spikes." "Name's Heston," the man said slowly. "Heston Farrow, and yeah, 40's a fever but not a killer, just sucks." Frillix turned to Resch. "How does a species endure this?" "We had a Rilpathian last year who melted at 39. Resch was already pulling up human biological data from the interspecies database. Humans appear to have a large thermal tolerance range, variable even among individuals. Some can function at 39. Some pass out at 38. Frillix stared at Heston. "You are not functioning." Heston slid off the pod and wobbled. "I'm trying." Frillix thrust a scanner toward him. "Back to bed. I must observe organ integrity." "You may be liquefying internally." "I'm not melting," Heston muttered, easing himself back onto the pod. "Just overheating." Resch handed him another water container. "Hydration will assist." Frillix was already typing furiously into a datapad. "Subject displays heat resilience beyond projected range, elevated protein synthesis, no sign of hemolysis. I must study this further." A soft chime echoed through the room, another patient alert. Resch turned. "Go," Resch said to Frillix. "You've tagged this one." "I'll handle the thernonite." Frillix hovered over Heston a moment longer, scribbling notes at a frantic pace, then disappeared through an auxiliary hatch. Heston leaned back, breathing slowly. "Feels like the Sahara in my skull," he muttered. "You were exposed to a marginal oxygen imbalance during the conversion onset," Resch said calmly. "Your body overcompensated. Fever was a response." "Yeah, we call that getting sick," Heston muttered. Resch observed him. "Interesting, you're recovering rapidly." "I'm not," Heston said. "I'm just pretending I am so no one pokes me with anything." Resch gave a short, dry exhale. "You may rest. Frillix will return shortly. He's currently convinced you're a thermal anomaly." "Great," Heston said, eyes closing. He drifted for a while, caught between dreams and the low hum of alien machines. At some point, Frillix returned with a tray of small instruments and a stack of thermal charts. "Your species should be extinct," Frillix muttered as it began scanning again. "I've heard worse," Heston replied without opening his eyes. Over the next few days, Heston remained in the medbay under close observation. Frillix refused to leave his side for more than an hour. Every yawn, every cough, every bead of sweat was logged. "You're sure your organs aren't failing?" Frillix asked on day 3. "I'd probably be screaming if they were," Heston said. "You drank water and smiled after a 40-degree fever." "I was thirsty." Frillix turned to its notes. "This is not normal behavior. Not even for humans." "Listen," Heston said, sitting up slowly, "we're not indestructible, but we bounce back, usually." Frillix blinked. "Bounce, recover, heal, eventually," Frillix nodded. "I must test that." Before Heston could protest, the door slammed open and a mechanical gurney rolled in carrying a charred and groaning alien. Resh followed behind, shouting over his shoulder, "Explosion in engineering." "Contain the plasma leak," Frillix rushed to assist, leaving Heston to sit up fully. He watched as the med team worked, pulling burnt clothing away from the alien's body, applying salve and injectors. "Need help?" Heston called out. Resh didn't look up. "Stay in bed." "You're still recovering. Feels wrong to just sit." Frillix glanced back. "You're not cleared for movement. Your temperature only returned to baseline this morning." Still, Heston stood. He swayed once, braced himself on the pod, and shuffled toward the supply cabinet. "I know basic emergency treatment," he said. "Was a field tech during the Martian collapse. We didn't have fancy injectors." Frillix froze. "You worked in an active collapse site with high fever thresholds. Didn't have much choice." Resh looked up from the injured engineer. "Get gauze and a hydrosol patch." Heston moved slowly, carefully. He handed off the supplies without collapsing. Frillix was watching him like he was conjuring fire from his fingertips. By the end of the week, Heston was allowed short walks. Frillix followed him everywhere, still convinced his internal temperature should have cooked him alive. It asked endless questions about body regulation, immune response, sweat glands. "You cool your bodies by leaking fluid?" Frillix asked, scandalized. "Yeah," Heston said. "Sweat." "It's gross, but it works." "Disgusting. Effective." Frillix frowned at him, then typed something into its datapad. One afternoon, Heston was outside the medbay for the first time when he heard shouting. A young technician had collapsed in the corridor, face flushed, breathing shallow. "Hyperthermia," a medical drone buzzed. "Species, Varnek, core temperature at critical level." Frillix ran up, panic in its voice. "He's overheating, we can't stabilize him." "Get him to the thermal chamber," someone yelled. Heston stepped forward. "You have to drop his temperature fast. Water." "Cool air, ice." "We can't use water. Varneks are sensitive to high moisture," Heston thought fast. "Can we use evaporative cooling without contact?" Frillix stared. "Explain?" Heston grabbed a nearby coolant line and began rigging it through a vent grid. "You vent this through the airstream, lower the ambient temperature. No direct contact. Risk of condensation, worth the risk if the alternative is organ failure." Frillix hesitated, then nodded. "Do it." They worked quickly. Within minutes, the Varnek technician's breathing steadied. His flush faded. Frillix looked at Heston, stunned. "You applied your species' heat management to another's physiology." "Didn't have many options," Heston said, wiping his forehead. Frillix stared at him, then turned to Resh. "We must file a report. Human adaptive thermoregulation is absurd." Resh nodded slowly, "and oddly effective." Heston leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "I'm going to sit down now," he muttered. Frillix handed him a water container. "Drink and smile. Apparently that's part of your recovery process." Heston chuckled, took a sip, and gave a weak grin. "You're not wrong." It was the 4th cycle since Heston had walked out of the medical bay, and Frillix still hadn't found a way to stop talking about him. "I've double-scanned his liver enzymes. They fluctuate like they're self-calibrating," Frillix said, trailing behind Dr. Resh down a narrow corridor lined with nutrient vines and coolant ducts. "That shouldn't be possible. No known species does that without induced stasis therapy." Resh didn't slow down. "You've submitted 3 physiology reports and flagged 2 ethics queries. Let the man rest." I'm not probing him, I'm observing, Frillix said, antennae twitching. Passively. From a respectful distance of 3 meters. You're following him with a thermal scanner, it's discreet. You taped it inside a sandwich tray. Frillix paused. It worked. Resh turned into the habitat lab before Frillix could respond, leaving the nurse standing in the corridor, clutching its datapad like a religious artifact. The station's internal lights dimmed to dusk mode as the cycle wound down, casting soft purples and greens along the walls. Heston was in the moon garden. He sat cross-legged in the soft blue moss, sleeves rolled up, fiddling with a cracked protein flask. Around him, the bioluminescent flora blinked and pulsed with rhythmic patterns that matched the station's artificial night cycle. Frillix approached slowly, careful not to startle the human. You've been out here for 3 hours. I counted 5, Heston said without looking up. Your station's clocks don't match Earth hours. I recalibrated my wristband. Frillix blinked. You recalibrated your device without authorization. It was off by 17 minutes, messes with circadian rhythm. Frillix crouched beside him. Your recovery period is complete. You're free to return to standard duty rotation, but your thermal profile is still concerning. I'm fine. You say that too often. Heston finally looked at Frillix. You ever been sick? Twice, Frillix said. Once from spoiled kelp extract. Once when I accidentally inhaled an unfiltered pollen cluster. So you know what it's like to want to crawl into a hole and disappear. Not exactly. I sneezed for 3 hours and then slept for 2 days. That sounds kind of nice. I assure you it was not. Heston leaned back on one elbow, watching the ceiling simulate a binary star dip below an imaginary ridge. I've been sick enough times to stop being surprised by it. You just push through. Frillix sat beside him. I don't understand your tolerance for discomfort. You could request sedation, assistance. We have systems. Sedation doesn't fix a fever, it just makes you forget it. You're remarkably casual about suffering, I'm not. I'm just used to it. Frillix studied him for a moment. The human's pulse was stable, respiration even, though his skin still carried a faint flush from his earlier exertion. You shouldn't have helped during the Varnek incident. You weren't cleared, didn't see anyone else jumping to improvise. I was calculating options, Frillix said defensively. I had to consider species-specific risks. You were stalling. I was thinking, and I was sweating. Frillix looked away, embarrassed. You're going to keep doing this, aren't you? Doing what? Intervening, improvising, making things up as you go. That's how we survive. Frillix narrowed its eyes. That's how you complicate everything. They sat in silence as the artificial wind shifted, rustling the glowing leaves. After a while, Frillix stood. There's a thermal anomaly in hydroponics, a malfunctioning condenser. Want to come sweat your way through that too? Heston smiled faintly, then stood. Sure, maybe I'll bring a towel this time. Hydroponics was a sauna. The condenser array had shorted out, turning the chamber into a humid swamp. The plants didn't mind, most were native to moisture-heavy planets, but the maintenance teams were less thrilled. You'll need breathing masks, one of the engineers shouted through the steam. The air's holding too much vapor, visibility's down to 20%. Frillix handed Heston a mask. You'll need this. Heston waved it away. I'll be fine for a few minutes. You are not fine, you are sweating again. I'm always sweating. It's a sign I'm working. Frillix followed as Heston picked his way over the slick floor tiles toward the central valve housing. He knelt, examined the panel, and pulled a tool from his belt. You're not authorized to repair this, Frillix said. I'm not repairing. I'm redirecting airflow. You're improvising again. Yup. He adjusted a series of internal baffles, rerouted the coolant vent into the side turbine, and bypassed the humidity sensor with a manual override. Within moments, the steam began to thin. There, Heston said, stepping back. Give it 10 minutes. Frillix scanned the surrounding air. You dropped ambient humidity by 11%, better than waiting 3 hours for a specialist. You could have caused a pressure rupture. Didn't. Frillix huffed. You risk too much. You worry too much. You're reckless. You're adorable when you're annoyed. Frillix froze. That was a joke, Heston added quickly. I know, Frillix said stiffly. I just didn't find it funny. By the next cycle, Heston had been added to the station's emergency adjunct roster, against Frillix's vocal protests. He's not trained for cross-species medicine, Frillix insisted. He's not treating anyone, Resh replied. He's improvising solutions when no one else moves fast enough. That's not a qualification. It is now. Frillix stormed out of the medbay, antennae twitching with fury. It found Heston in a cargo bay, reconfiguring a storage drone to carry medical supplies instead of coolant pods. You've infected the command staff, Frillix said, with competence, with irrational enthusiasm for your shortcuts. They work. Frillix folded its arms. You're a fever-riddled chaos vector. Thanks for noticing. I don't mean that as a compliment. You never do. Frillix scowled, then watched him work. What are you doing, refitting this drone? If we get another plasma leak incident, I can send it in ahead of the med team with first response kits. You're automating triage, not fully, just giving us a head start. Frillix stared at him. You should be a doctor. I don't like the paperwork. You don't like rules. Same thing, Frillix sighed. You're going to keep doing this. Until you make me stop, Frillix hesitated. Or until I actually melt, Heston added. That's not funny. A little funny. Frillix watched as the drone lifted off the floor and hovered steadily. The human's programming was crude but functional, efficient. There were gaps, safety redundancies ignored, permissions bypassed, but it worked. I'll supervise your field assignments, Frillix said finally. You volunteering. I'm preventing disaster. Same thing. Frillix walked away without another word but didn't deactivate the drone. 3 cycles had passed since the hydroponics incident, and Heston hadn't touched another coolant pipe since. Not because he'd already been offered a dozen side assignments, but because Resh had quietly instructed Frillix to keep him busy with low-risk engagements. Frillix interpreted this with near-religious zeal, assigning him to assist with non-critical care in the outpatient sector, where most cases involved minor scrapes, allergic reactions, and the occasional fainting from improper nutrient balance. Heston didn't complain. He'd seen worse. It was still strange, though, watching someone pass out from eating too much glowfruit. Late one cycle, with the corridors quiet and the station's artificial gravity running a half-notch light for maintenance recalibrations, Heston sat cross-legged on a bench beside a patient kiosk, flipping through a digital anatomy guide on interspecies joint structures. You're reading again, Frillix said flatly, approaching with a tray of dermal patches and a bottle of sterilizing mist. I'm learning, Heston said without looking up. You're not qualified to diagnose anything? I don't plan to. Just curious how your shoulder rotates the opposite direction. Frillix placed the tray on a nearby console and frowned. We evolved for vertical canopy mobility. Your skeleton is inefficient. You ever try to throw a rock? Why would anyone throw a rock, exactly? Frillix opened its mouth, then closed it again. Instead, it pulled up the next patient file, tapping the screen with one finger. We have a minor fracture case in room 4. Vexari female slipped on a nutrient spill. Want me to grab the brace kit? No, you'll talk too much. Heston stood anyway. She'll probably be scared. Let me help. Frillix didn't argue, which was rare. The Vexari had 4 elbows per arm and a cartilage density similar to puff pastry, which made fractures common but manageable. She sat stiffly on the examination slab, eyes wide and unblinking, her skin faintly iridescent. One arm was cradled tightly to her chest. Hey there, Heston said gently. I'm Heston, this is Frillix, we're not gonna do anything weird. The Vexari tilted her head. You are the overheated mammal, still am, he said, but I'm not contagious. Frillix began scanning the injury. Clean break, no displacement. She'll need a foam splint and nutrient boost. Heston opened a drawer and pulled out the splinting foam, which expanded on contact and hardened over bone without needing adhesives. He moved slowly, showing the Vexari the material before applying it. "Pressure okay?" he asked as he molded the foam. The Vexari nodded slowly. "She's not used to being touched by a non-shelled species," Frillix murmured. "Well, I'm soft, but I'm gentle," Heston said. The Vexari blinked again and let out a sound somewhere between a chirp and a sigh. Frillix handed over a nutrient vial. "Drink this. It'll start cellular repair." The Vexari accepted it and drank in small, careful sips. Heston cleaned the tools while Frillix updated the patient file. After a few moments, the Vexari stood, flexing her arm slightly. "You are inefficient," she said to Heston. "But soft is not always bad. I'll take that as a compliment." She left without another word. Frillix snapped the file closed. "You have a strange effect on patients. I talk to them like people. Most of them aren't. That's a whole philosophical can of worms." Frillix ignored the comment and walked toward the sterilization sink. Heston followed. "You still think we're walking medical anomalies?" Frillix didn't look up from the sink. "Yes. Even after I helped you with the Varnick, you're a statistical outlier. I haven't ruled out genetic defects." Heston laughed. "Thanks, I think." There was a brief chime from the main corridor. A crew member entered, holding their arm awkwardly. It was a Goran, tall and covered in short spines with a mottled pattern of rust and blue. One of the spines was bent at an unnatural angle. "Training pod malfunction," the Goran said gruffly. "Landed wrong." Frillix gestured to the nearest exam table. "Lie down. Don't move the damaged spine." The Goran complied, groaning slightly. Heston stood nearby, watching Frillix work. He noticed a subtle twitch in the Goran's jaw, a sign of pain response. The damaged spine was connected to a nerve cluster, and the Goran species had high reflexive sensitivity. Frillix began to prepare a local anesthetic. "Wait," Heston said. "That might trigger a secondary contraction. You've got to isolate the nerve first." Frillix paused, syringe in hand. "You're not certified in Goran anatomy." "No, but I read the joint structure guide this morning. Page 32. See that ridge? That's the pressure node. You stimulate that first, the pain reflex drops." Frillix looked skeptical but pressed a diagnostic probe gently against the node. The Goran's jaw relaxed. Frillix adjusted the injection angle and administered the anesthetic. The patient exhaled deeply. "Reflex suppressed," Frillix admitted. "Unexpectedly effective. Sometimes reading pays off." "Sometimes, yes," Frillix said, then reluctantly added, "I will note this in the treatment log." They spent the rest of the cycle handling minor injuries and adjustments. A Cerny who'd inhaled a cleaning vapor by mistake, a child like Kella who'd eaten a metal washer, and a technician with sensor fatigue from staring at a holographic console too long. When the shift ended, Frillix handed Heston a small data chip. "What's this?" "Your temporary certification code. Resh approved it. You're now an auxiliary technician for non-invasive care." Heston stared at the chip. "You vouched for me." "I submitted your incident reports. They were readable." "Now that's a compliment." Frillix tilted its head. "You're still dangerously unpredictable. But you're useful. I'll frame that. You're not allowed to improvise with plasma tools." "Noted. And if your temperature spikes again, you report it immediately." "I promise not to boil." Frillix turned to leave but hesitated. "You're not like the others," it said without facing him. "Humans, any of them, you adapt without asking permission. Sometimes asking slows you down." Frillix nodded faintly and walked away. Heston looked at the certification chip in his hand. He didn't need the title. He didn't care about the status. But it meant something that maybe, just maybe, the universe figured out that humans weren't just fragile meatbags wandering around in a galaxy of precision biology. Sometimes, being soft was the strongest thing you could be.